Hello, this is Professor James Strickler, and this is a course in American government. This lesson is from Unit 11 about public policy. It's Lesson 12 about Social Security. In this lesson, you'll learn about Social Security, you'll learn about demographic insolvency, you'll learn about Social Security politics, and you'll also learn about Ponzi schemes. In the previous lesson, you learned about the various methods that the government may use to coerce us into doing what it considers to be socially correct. This is social policy. We talked about how the government may prohibit you from doing certain things, or require you to do certain things, or simply come take your stuff and give it to somebody else. What we call redistributing of resources. In this lesson, we're going to look at that third possible way that the government may try to get you to do what it thinks is the right thing to do, by redistributing your resources. This is done on a big scale in the country through the major entitlement programs that we've mentioned previously in this course. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, various other welfare programs, and Obamacare are the big ones that the federal government engages in. We don't have time to talk about how each of these programs work, so we're just going to focus on the biggest one, Social Security, where the most money is spent, and it probably affects the most people, or at least potentially does in the end. Social Security provides benefits for elderly, for the minor survivors of workers who have died, and for those who have disabilities. Where you're most familiar with this probably is where you see older people in your family who receive Social Security checks after they've reached a certain age. The age is generally 65 that people become eligible to receive Social Security money. Social Security is funded through payroll taxes. So what that means is that when you're working, you get a paycheck. If you look at your pay stub, you'll see that there's a thing listed on there with the initials FICA. FICA is how people commonly refer to it. That's where money is being taken from your paycheck to be placed in the Social Security fund. Your employer also pays a portion to that same fund. Social Security is oftentimes mistakenly thought of as a pension system. Now, what's a pension system? A pension system is where you put money in over the course of working in a particular position. Maybe your employer does it for you. And it's put in a particular account for you where it gains interest, builds over time, and then when you retire, you get to draw money out of that to help you live. A lot of people think that that's how Social Security works, that their money that they pay out of their paycheck into Social Security sits somewhere waiting for them to then use after they retire. But that's not how it works. Social Security instead is a wealth transfer system. Well, what do I mean by that? What, a wealth transfer system? A diagram will help explain this. The way Social Security works is that healthy young workers go to work, they earn their paycheck, and a tax is taken out of it. That payroll FICA tax that I just mentioned. The money from that tax is then funneled into the Social Security Trust Fund. The Social Security Trust Fund is the pool where this money is kept. There are government administrators that oversee it. And then from the Social Security Trust Fund, they pay out benefits to those who are entitled to receive them. The elderly people we talked about before, or not listed on this slide, but we mentioned before, people, minor children who are survivors of workers who died, or disabled people. People who it's believed for one reason or another can't work on their own, but we don't want to leave them just penniless on the streets, so this fund was set up to take care of them, to at least make sure that they have enough income to get sort of the minimums necessary in life. That was the purpose behind setting up Social Security in the first place. Now notice, though, that the young healthy workers, their money doesn't go sit in the Social Security Trust Fund for them to then take out later. Instead, it just gets passed out the other door. It goes in one door and out the other. The young, healthy workers pay in, and then the old and disabled people get the money out. And then what happens is, as the young and healthy workers grow older, then their own children and grandchildren will take their places and pay into the fund, and then they'll be among the old and disabled people who are taking money out. Now, this system would seem to work as long as you've always got new, young, healthy workers coming along to pay into the system, to then go out to the people who are on the other side, perhaps because they've finally retired. But there's a problem. When Social Security was originally set up, the average person who was in the system lived to only an age of 63, while they didn't get benefits until 65. That means the average person died before they ever got any Social Security money. When it first got started in 1940, there were a little over 200,000 people getting money out of the system. Now just think about that moment. There's 200,000 people getting money out of the system immediately when it starts, because this is an entitlement. If you fit some certain category, you get money, whether you've paid in or not. Now, while there were only 200,000 people taking money out, there are about 35 million people paying money in through their payroll deductions out of their paycheck for the FICA tax. That meant that there are about 160 workers paying in for each one person getting money out. So plenty of people putting money in, only a few people getting money out. That Social Security Trust Fund was going to be really healthy, it seemed. But things have changed. In 2010, the average life expectancy was 79 years. Now remember, if you're still retiring at 65, that means the average person then is pulling money out of Social Security for 14 years. Now, instead of 200,000 recipients, now we've got 53 million people getting Social Security funds. And while there's 53 million people getting the money, there's only about 157 million people paying in 2010. That means that for every one recipient, now there's only 3 workers paying in. And the way the trends are going in the near future, will be only 2 workers paying in for each one person taking money out. So basically what's happening here is that people are living a lot longer, and they're having fewer children along the way too. So we're ending up with fewer workers, relatively speaking, paying in, and more retirees taking money out. We can illustrate this on the diagram that we built a moment ago. So the way we had it set up was we've got plenty of young, healthy workers paying in through the FICA tax into the Social Security Trust Fund, and then the trustees sending money out on the other side to the older and disabled people through their entitled Social Security benefits. But as we end up with more and more older and disabled people living longer and longer lives, and at the same time having fewer and fewer children to become the new healthy and young workers, this diagram changes. Notice as we end up with fewer young and healthy workers, we end up with less money going into the Social Security Trust Fund. As we end up with more and more older and disabled people, we're going to have more and more money going out of the trust fund. Well, that's unsustainable over time. If you're taking in less and less income but paying out more and more money, it's not going to be something that you can do forever. And the trustees of the Social Security Trust Fund have admitted this. In their 2012 annual report, they reported that as of 2011, the money they were paying out was exceeding the money they were bringing in. And based on that, they were projecting that the Social Security Trust Fund would be empty by 2033. What this means is insolvency. In other words, there's not going to be any money left. Insolvency is inevitable unless somehow this dynamic is changed. Unless somehow we get more money in, probably through tax increases, because I really doubt we can force people to have more children. Or we send fewer benefits out. In other words, decrease the amount of money that we're paying to the retired people, or we don't pay them for as long. But those possible solutions to head off that day of reckoning when there won't be any money left in the Social Security Trust Fund are not probably going to work because, as we learned at the very beginning of this unit, voters punish pain. If you tell them that you're going to raise the taxes that you're going to take from them, or you're going to decrease the benefits you're going to give to them, they're going to get mad. And politicians aren't going to like that. But you may say, wait a minute, this system is unfair to young workers. It's taking money away from them, and then it very well may be bankrupt before they ever get a chance to collect. So while the older workers, or I should say the retirees now, are benefiting from the system, the generation that may be paying in will never have a chance to. So people from that younger generation may, with a justification, scream, this is not fair to us. Well, politically that may not matter, because old people vote. They vote at very high rates. In contrast, young people don't vote. They are the least likely demographic to go out and vote. So think about this. If you're a politician and you've got all these older voters who you know are going to show up at the polls, and then you've got younger voters who are less likely to show up, who are then complaining about this transfer of wealth to the older people, who are you going to listen to? Are you going to listen to the people that don't vote or the ones that do? Obviously, the politicians are going to listen to the older people. And what do the older people want? Well, basically, they are scared to death of any suggestion that Social Security may be changed. They've gotten used to the idea that they're going to have Social Security there to help them through their retirements. And so any mention of any possibility of reforming the system to try to take care of the fears of the younger workers who are paying into it meets great resistance from the older beneficiaries who are getting money out of the system. But the problems of Social Security go beyond just the fact that it's likely to become insolvent, that there's a whole generation now paying in that may, in fact, not get any money out of it. Well, how can it get worse than that? Well, it can possibly be worse than that if you consider the fact that Social Security appears to many people to be what is called a Ponzi scheme. Ponzi scheme named after a guy named Charles Ponzi, who started setting up these schemes to make himself wealthy, refers to a business proposition where earlier investors into this business enterprise end up being paid off from investments from later investors. Now that may sound a little complicated, so let me try to explain that a little more clearly. A similar system is something called a pyramid scheme, and that might be easier to explain for you. In a pyramid scheme, I might come to you and say, give me $10 and I'll give you $20 tomorrow. Well, you give me the $10, and then the way I'm going to pay you $20 tomorrow is I go find two other people and say, give me $10 and I'll give you $20 tomorrow. And so they give me their $10. Now I've got $20, which I can then pay to you. But now I owe $40 to those people. Well, where am I going to get it? Well, then I go to four people and say, give me $10 and I'll give you $20 tomorrow. And I get the 40 from them, and then I'm able to pay off the other two, etc., etc. The problem with a pyramid scheme is I've always got to find new people to pay in. And as soon as I run out of new people to pay in, the system falls apart. And the last group that paid in gets nothing. They get screwed. And they're usually the biggest group. Well, a Ponzi scheme is very similar. You are paying people some sort of money in exchange for the investment they put in, but your scheme isn't really earning any money on its own. So the only way to pay off those people is to go get more money from somebody else. In the business world, a system like a pyramid scheme or a Ponzi scheme is considered to be criminal. It's considered to be fraud. You try to set something up like that, you go to jail. Well, is Social Security really like that? Well, there's three features of Social Security that I think we should consider when we think about whether it's really a Ponzi scheme or not. Now, I've marked one in yellow and the other two in gray here, because the one in yellow really shows how Social Security is similar to a Ponzi scheme, while the two in gray actually show ways in which it's different. Social Security is very similar to a Ponzi scheme because it's a wealth transfer program. So the only way you're going to be paying off the old people is you have to get new money from young people. Essentially what you're doing is new investors need to be recruited to pay off the earlier investors, just like a Ponzi scheme. The only way to pay off the people invested is to go get new investors. But Social Security actually differs from a Ponzi scheme in some important ways. The first one is that in the case of Social Security, new investors are forced to join whether they want to or not. A Ponzi scheme, you choose to join. The person running the scheme may lie to you and convince you to join, but you still make a choice. Social Security is not a choice. It is law. When you go to work, the Social Security tax will be taken from your paycheck whether you want it to be taken or not. That's it. So in that way, Social Security is, in a certain sense, worse than a Ponzi scheme because you can't opt out. You're going to be forced to join whether you want to or not as soon as you take a job. A second way that Social Security differs from a Ponzi scheme is that in a Ponzi scheme, the investors can't be required to give more money. The initial investment that they make, yeah, they may end up being asked later for more, but they don't have to give more later. But in the case of Social Security, if the government decides to raise your payroll tax, sorry, you're going to end up paying the more whether you not want to or not. So this is another way in which Social Security may actually be worse than a Ponzi scheme. The government who set up the scheme of Social Security is taking money from you in order to pay off previous investors. And they may force you to join, whether you want to or not. In fact, they do force you to join. And they may, even in the future, raise your tax and require you to pay more into this system, whether you want to or not. All right, let's review what we learned in this lesson. First of all, what kind of program is Social Security? Is it a pension fund, a wealth transfer program, a savings account, or a pay-as-you-go account? Social Security is a wealth transfer program, taking money from young, healthy workers and giving it to old and disabled people. Why will Social Security be insolvent? In other words, why will it run out of money? Is it because not enough young workers exist to pay into it? Is it that there's theft from the trust fund? Is it because workers are refusing to join it? Or is it because the taxes that they're paying are being reduced? The Social Security Trust Fund will become insolvent because there's simply not enough young workers paying into it to pay for the old and disabled people taking money out of it. Why don't politicians fix Social Security? Is it because young voters have too much power? Is it because there really is no problem with Social Security? Or is it because older voters won't allow them to fix it? Or are they simply unaware that there's a problem? Politicians are aware there's a problem with Social Security, but they don't fix it because older voters won't allow it. Every time a politician suggests really attacking the Social Security problem, making changes, older voters freak out, and the politician backs off. How is Social Security like a Ponzi scheme? Is it that decades of investment are needed? Is it that it's a very secure investment? Is it that it pays high returns? Or is it that new investors are always needed to pay off the older investors? Social Security is like a Ponzi scheme in that new investors are always needed to pay off the old. Now, as I mentioned, though, in some ways it's worse in that you don't have a choice whether to join Social Security or not, unlike a Ponzi scheme where you could simply choose not to participate. And Social Security could result in your taxes being raised if the government decides that that's a way to make up for this sort of inevitable insolvency, is to raise the Social Security tax on the young, healthy workers. They could do that. There's nothing you could do to stop them. In fact, with older voters voting and younger voters not, that's a possible future, is that as Social Security gets closer and closer to running out of money, the government simply raises the tax on the younger people. And since they don't vote as much, they just have to suffer as their money is taken from them and being transferred to the older people. That completes this lesson. The next lesson will be from Unit 11 also. It'll be Lesson 13 about entitlement politics.